I'm hungry.
Sat down in the parking lot in front of the convenience store. After a while, the staff at the convenience store approached me. "Are you alright?" She was a kind lady.
Hi, are you alright?
"Yes, I'm just hungry."
I should wait here,
Dissipating, and she went inside the store. A couple of minutes later, she came running to me again and offered me food.
do I need to eat this?
"Yes, please." She had microwaved the food.
Nice.
She smiled kindly and said, "Go ahead." And she handed me the food with a knife and fork. This was the first time I met Grace. My name is Julian Walker. My mom left home a while ago and never came back. My dad had a habit of gambling from morning till night. He only brought home a lot of goodies when he earned a profit. Just within the week after Mom left, the refrigerator was empty. From then on, my only meals were food I got at the elementary school.
Well, Julian, don't go anywhere until I come back.
And he went gambling again. I didn't have school on Sundays, so I was hungry all day long. Weeks off on a Sunday, I went to a neighboring convenience store's parking lot. Grace brought me food again. After I finished eating it, I apologized to her. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any money." But Grace said, "It's fine. It'll be thrown away as garbage because it expires in an hour."
Store where?
Oh, I mean it'll be thrown away as garbage. Really, what a waste. I know it's a waste, isn't it? What is your name?
Julian. Yeah.
My name is Grace Baker. I work here every day, so if you like, you can come every day.
Grace smiled and gave me another portion of food. I believe I was able to survive because of Grace. After that, I got free food every day in the parking lot of a convenience store. This continued for more than a year. Throughout that period, my dad continued to spend his monthly welfare and child allowances on gambling and liquor, so there was no way I could afford to buy a new pair of gym clothes or sneakers, even though the ones I had were dirty, so everything I wore was damaged. Because of this, several of my classmates were mean to me, and I didn't want to attend school. Eventually, I started staying home alone all the time. In the evening, I would go to the usual convenience store and get food from Grace. For a while, I continued this kind of life. One day, early in the morning, a stranger, a man and a woman, came to my house.
"Mr. Walker, we've received several inquiries from your neighbors. We learned that your son does not attend primary school and that you left him at home from morning to night while you gambled. What you are doing is a violation of his school attendance responsibility. If this continues, we are afraid we will have to take your son into temporary custody."
Then my dad clearly said, "What the hell are you talking about? My wife suddenly disappeared and left him here. I'm annoyed too."
I don't need him. And my dad threw beer cans at them. My dad abandoned me.
The place they took me was called a children's home. There, they fed me breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Every day, I was given a change of clothes, and the personnel provided me with clean, washed garments. There were kids there ranging in age from my age to junior high students, and I quickly made friends. It was like heaven for me, considering my life with my dad. I spent about a month there. They told me that my dad had caused some kind of trouble and had been arrested by the police. and they said he wouldn't be able to pick me up for another 5 or 10 years. So I had to go to elementary school from the facility. After a while, I remembered Grace. I wonder how she is doing. I miss her.
Here's and I told her, by days now power why I wasn't showing up. Then Grace said, I didn't know you were in such big trouble. I'm sorry I can do anything for you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry I couldn't do anything for you. I'm sorry.
She cried and apologized to me. I didn't understand why Grace was crying. She had done nothing wrong. I was able to live until I was protected because Grace gave me convenient store food every day. After that, I sometimes went to see Grace after school. Grace always greeted me with a kind smile. I talked with her for about 10 minutes and then went back to the facility. Grace had a son who was 3 years older than me. His name was Jacob.
Jacob doesn't talk much like you.
But Grace sometimes said so sadly. Here is something I learned after I became a high school student. Jacob was not related to Grace by blood. Grace's ex-husband had cheated on her, and Jacob was born as just a result of his affair with his lover. Her husband abruptly left the divorce papers with Jacob and vanished with his partner one day. Grace had no choice but to take in Jacob, who was left behind. That's why she couldn't ignore me, who appeared to be lonely all of the time. He says, I was in the late elementary years when the whole class knew that I was living in an institution and that my father was in prison. My buddies, who had previously been close, grew distant, and we began to talk less and less. Hudson was a student in the same class whose parents served on the PO2 board. Hudson apparently overheard his parents discussing my parents with other P2 board members, and Hudson told the whole the class about it. Every day, he would stand in front of my desk with several of his cronies.
Your parents must be terrible scumbags. You're such a miserable guy to be abandoned by such helpless parents.
He teased me every day. His buddies made fun of me in a mocking way. I feel sorry for you, they all teased me as well. When I didn't say anything back and ignored them, they didn't like it. Citations 48D, they wrote on my desk, "Don't come to school with a permanent marker." The same message was scribbled on my sports gear and textbooks in my desk. I gradually started skipping school. I used to go to a park in the adjacent town to kill time when I left the facility at the customary hour in the morning. And when I felt lonely, I went to see Grace.
Doyen?
It was Grace. She said her house was near this park. Grace sat with me on a bench in the park and listened to my story. I explained how I was bullied at school because of my dad and my residence at the institution. I told her that my homeroom teacher ignored it and did not assist me. And I didn't want to go to school anymore, so I skipped lessons and spent every day at the park. Grace was crying.
But you didn't do anything wrong. This is terrible. I can't believe this.
But with that, she hugged me. After a short silence, Grace said something.
Julian, if you like, why don't you join my family?
I was so surprised, but I was so happy. Seriously, are you kidding me? I asked her again and again. Grace came to see me at the facility, the city's consulting office, and the welfare department several times. and she went to see my dad, who was in prison. I want your permission to let me take Julian in. She begged my dad. Actually agreed to Grace's offer. I was already in the 6th grade, the last year of elementary school when Grace adopted me.
You don't have to call me Mom if you don't want to. You call me Grace as usual.
She told me so. I moved to an elementary school near Grace's house. Jacob was in the 8th grade at that time. As Grace told me, he was a very quiet boy. I assumed he was the type of boy who didn't show much emotion and didn't know what he was thinking. We eventually grew accustomed to living together as a group of 3. We started calling each other by our names. We didn't fight, but we didn't play together either. Jacob once purchased a video game with the proceeds from his first part-time job in high school, and I remember playing it with him a little bit. After Grace took me in, she started working part-time. She worked part-time in a cafe every morning after she dropped us off at school. In the afternoon, she went to work at a convenience store and came home after 6 in the evening. She would bring home leftover food and sweets from the cafe and the convenience store every day. I looked forward to it, and every day she made a side dish and a bowl of soup. If you added curry powder to the potato salad in this manner, it would taste different. The remaining side dish would be prepared with a different seasoning and included in the next day. This lunch, Grace was always looking out for us even though she was very busy working part-time. We were not rich by any means, and if anything, we were poor. But I enjoyed every day living with Grace and Jacob. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to high school while I was in junior high, but I enjoyed every day living with Grace and Jacob. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to high school while I was in junior high. I wanted to get a job and help Grace without going to high school. But I knew I needed to finish high school, because if I didn't, I would not have many work possibilities, and I'd have problems in the future.
If you are unsure whether or not to attend high school, you should go to see if it is what you expected, or if it will benefit you. You could take a different route based on what you discover.
And in the end, I decided to go to a technical high school. In the spring of my sophomore year, Jacob decided to move out. The company Jacob worked for, after graduating from technical school, had company housing, and he was going to move into it. I didn't tell them, but I was disappointed inside when I heard the news. I assumed that Jacob, who was going to work first, would assist Grace in some way. And flew by, and Grace, who had raised 2 sons who are not her blood relatives on her own, was in her late 50s. Working 2 part-time jobs must have been difficult for her. Grace had worked hard to raise Jacob on behalf of Jacob's uncaring parents. Didn't Jacob want to repay her? I had always wondered. Grace pulled me from an institution and raised me while I was in elementary school. Thanks to her, I was able to go to high school. Grace also assisted me in transferring from the elementary school thanks where I'd been bullied. In relations, I knew I'd never forget my debt of thanks. After that, even after 6 months or a year, Jacob did not send Grace any money. After he got a job, he came to pick up his stuff sometimes, but he never came back during the holiday season. Graduated from a technical high school without incident. I was able to find a job at a company that manufactured special rubber. I was very happy to be able to enter the company of my choice. When I saw a wide, solid bridge that we crossed on the bus during a junior high school field trip, I've always wished to construct such a magnificent bridge. Since then, I've made it a pastime to collect materials from bridges across the United States. When I discovered that bridges employ not just metal, but also unique rubber goods to avoid vibration induced by earthquakes and high winds, I was intrigued. I decided I wanted to work for the company that made them. Despite my sympathy for Grace, I worked solely on Sundays during my 3 years of high school. I put a lot of effort into my studies so that I could get a scholarship. Then I was hired by the company that made the rubber goods for bridges, company I had longed for. I put a lot of effort into my studies so that I could get a scholarship. Then I was hired by the company I had longed for. Grace was as happy as if it was her own life.
Jacob, good for you. You worked hard for 3 years. I'm really happy for you.
Once I got the job at the company, I worked hard.
Oh, my first paycheck? Yes.
When I saw my first paycheck in my bank book, I was moved. When I received my first salary, I invited Grace to a fine dining restaurant that I had planned for us, and I had made a big resolution for that day. I decided to do something that I had not been able to do for a long time.
Oh, I'm pleased you're treating me to your first paycheck.
Grace was in a good mood, and after toasting with beer, I opened my mouth.
Mom, thank you so much for everything. I will take care of you from now on, and beg, please look after yourself. You don't have to work multiple part-time jobs.
I told her that. Grace's eyes widened and looked surprised.
Julian, did you just call me Mom?
Grace's eyes became teary as she said so.
Don't cry, Mom. I really wanted to call you Mom for a long time now. But I was kind of nervous. I'm sorry it took so much time.
Looked happy, but she couldn't stop crying for a while. Mom only worked part-time at the cafe in the mornings after that.
If I suddenly stopped doing everything, I would develop dementia.
Mom laughed and said so. Then, during the holidays of my 5th year of employment, a surprising person came to visit us. A clerk, whom I had not heard from for nearly 6 years, came to see us.
Jacob, you didn't call us or come to see me on holiday. What have you been doing for the past 6 years?
I yelled at him and was about to grab him when my mom intervened.
Julie, it's okay. I'm sure you had some reason, right, Jacob? And han darfst då ej för mig, vilken mind just
And she let Jacob come inside. Then Jacob sat on the chair and held out a thick envelope to Mom.
Please take this. It's not much at all, but thank you for raising me until I turned 20.
The envelope contained $30,000. Mom was startled and at a loss for words for a moment, but then immediately said,
Did talking about it simply did, what a mother's expected to do. And Shirley, I can't accept this.
I've never been good at expressing myself, and I've struggled for a long time to communicate my thanks. Mom, I've never been a good talker, and I've struggled for a long time. communicate my thanks. This is the only way I can express my gratitude. Please accept this as a Mother's Day and birthday gift for you for the past 26 years.
I understood that Jacob had been working to repay Mom's kindness.
Well, if you say so, I'll accept it then. Thank you, Jacob.
Mom finally accepted the envelope. There were tears in her eyes.
From now on, I'll try to come home on weekends and have dinner with you.
With this promise, Jacob left. Not bad, Jacob. I felt a little bad for misjudging him. Alright, I have to do my best too. I'm going to do more to support my mom from now on. When I was in high school, my life was completely ruined after my mother died of an illness. My father abandoned my mother and took up with another woman. My father left the house as soon as my mother died to live with his girlfriend. He left without me while I couldn't even accept the death of my mother. Before my father left, he told me, "I will look after you until you graduate from high and school, but then you will be on your own." My father-daughter relationship with him had to come to an end. This was during my senior year of high school when I was nearing the end of my preparation for the entrance exams. I had no choice but to live alone in the house where I had previously lived with my Emily, a young girl who couldn't cook or eat well, lost her parents and was forced to live alone. The house, which had been warm until then, suddenly became gloomy and lifeless. Breaking my heart, my high school was a preparatory school, and the majority of the students were aiming for college, but my plan to attend college vanished. My father also paid my rent and tuition until I graduated from high school, as promised, but he never sent me money for food or other living expenses. I would have to live entirely on my own after graduation, and because I had only worked part-time for short periods of time, I had no savings. I still had schoolwork to do, and it was as if I didn't have enough money to live on. I looked all over the house for money, but I couldn't find any. I later learned that the person my father had abandoned my mother and me to move in was apparently someone else's wife. He had left us with everything that could be used for money to pay the lawyer. He even took out my mother's gold necklace, which she cherished, as well as everything else. I simply couldn't get over my mother's death. Although I could have talked to someone or asked my father for money, I needed money to live, so I worked as hard as I could to find a part-time job. Of course, I had concerned friends, and some adults were also concerned and kind to me. However, I became reserved around them due to embarrassment and misery. Exit drill as the new year began. I continued studying for the exams as usual, but my heart was heavy. Studying seemed pointless without a future to look forward to. I felt like I had been confronted with this reality, and I hated everything about this life. With the little money I had earned from my part-time job, I left the house. I left the empty apartment where I once lived a close and happy family. I wanted to leave there at all costs. I despised my kitchen's home where I used to live happily without a care, because it was no longer real. I quit my part-time job and ran away to a faraway place. Running away from home in the winter was really hard. I was aware that if I was arrested, the police would contact my father, whom I did not want to see causing me problems. To avoid suspicion, I slept in a 24-hour chain hamburger shop and moved from one internet cafe to another. The money was dwindling fast. I had no idea what to do, and I thought I was going to die. I considered engaging in prostitution numerous times since leaving home, but I was afraid because I lacked experience. But I was about to run out of money. I couldn't care less anymore. I decided to engage in prostitution out of desperation.
You see, I needed money to live, so I worked as hard as I could to find a part-time job. And now,
I chose to stand near a motel and speak with someone who appeared friendly. However, I couldn't find anyone who looked nice, but I had no time to waste, and I was determined. Finally, I spotted a kind looking person in his 30s. I took a step forward to talk to him, and our eyes met. Yes, the man called out to me. My voice trembled, and I couldn't say anything else. I just stood there, unable to say the words, "Would you like to go to a hotel with me?" He moved his gaze from my feet to my head. I thought I would flee.
I got a bad vibe and considered walking away. Then, what's about walking away? And there's
He said, "Don't worry, I won't call the police."
He looked at me fearfully and smiled. "Are you running away from home?"
I nodded my head. This man would be my first.
The man was silent for a bit, then said, "Well, follow me."
We started to walk.
I told my racing heart that it was for my own good and that I was ready for it. I followed him, wondering where he was going.
I wondered if he was rich.
I was terrified because it was near a downtown area where there had been a number of disturbing incidents. He asked me like a friend.
I thought, will you pay me to have sex with you?
When we got off the elevator and opened the door,
But is someone there? I was surprised.
He said, I'm home, and a gentlewoman's voice replied, "You're late today." I was stunned.
a stickle woman appeared. I was surprised.
Horsewoman asked. Just like the woman asked, "Who was that girl?"
I thought, this man couldn't leave me alone. He said, "She escaped from home and is now in trouble." I was stunned. I felt a different kind of nervousness, knowing that all the tension I had been feeling had suddenly dissipated and that I was being helped by a kind couple.
She said, "Come on in," and smile at me.
She even let a little girl like me into her house, whom she didn't even know.
She was quite surprised as well.
I had a warm bath for the first time in a while. By time, completely calm, she greeted me with a kind smile. Ever since left home, I felt relaxed, and tears welled up in my eyes. It will be ready soon. Me too. We only had a normal conversation. For over a cup of tea. After finishing their meal, they were talking about casual stuff. Just over a cup of tea. After finishing their meal, they were talking about casual stuff.
He said, it's horrible, you poor thing," she said with tears in her eyes.
He said, "You have gone through a lot."
Ebbed so hard that I collapsed on the table. I apologized. I promised myself that I would never do it again. I helped the wife with her chores. I asked for their advice on the future. I received some money from my father, but the man comforted me by saying, "Oh, why don't you consider it better than being ignored?" I decided to think that way. Before meeting the couple, I didn't have the energy to do anything, but now I have the energy to live. I had already earned my credits, so I only went to high school to get my diploma. I received some money from my father, but the man comforted me by saying, "Why don't you consider it better than being ignored?" I decided to think that way.
I promised myself that I would never do it again.
He said, you are welcome to stay here until you calm down. I'll help you any way I can now that I know what's going on.
She said with tears in eyes.
Because I had kept my distance from my friends. I sobbed so hard that I collapsed on the table. I apologized. I helped the wife with her chores. I asked for their advice on the future. I received some money from my father, but the man comforted me by saying, "Why don't you consider it better than being ignored?" I decided to think that way. Before meeting the couple, I didn't have the energy to do anything, but now I have the energy to live. I had already earned my credits, so I only went to high school to get my diploma. I received some money from my father, but the man comforted me by saying, "Why don't you consider it better than being ignored?" I decided to think that way.
Go ahead and move out, and please take care of the rest. I'll help you in any way I can now that I know what's going on.
I felt relieved and told them what had happened.
I had already earned my credits, so I only went to high school to get my diploma. I received some money from my father, but the man comforted me by saying, "Oh, why don't you consider it better than being ignored?" I decided to think that way.
Follow the man's advice.
My father's money was not enough, and it was hard for me, who had no money. I accepted their assistance, and they loaned me some money to pay the deposit. I looked for a part-time job to earn money for living expenses so that I could be self-sufficient.
At first I was exhausted and had to rely on the couple for meals and other necessities.
I spent my days looking for a full-time job while working part-time and living independently. If I don't use much of my salary, I can't even save it. He said, considering her age, "She should be your sister." His wife nodded in agreement. I'm making progress on repaying the money I borrowed from the couple.
I feel very happy when I see the couple getting along well with each other.
Now I have a wonderful boyfriend, and I am very happy.
I hope they can attend my wedding as my current parents.